The Grumman F9F Panther, hanging in the National Naval Aviation Museum at Pensacola, still carries its straight wings level, frozen mid-flight, as if nobody told it the swept-wing era already started. A subsonic straight-wing Navy fighter with a British engine, the kind of airplane that should have died fast against a MiG-15. On November 9, 1950, Lieutenant Commander William Thomas Amon flew one into a formation of Chinese MiG-15s over the Yalu River and shot one down. First jet versus jet kill in United States Navy history. The MiG-15 had every advantage that mattered on paper. Swept wings at 35 degrees, a top speed north of 600 miles per hour, a ceiling above 50,000 feet, two 23mm cannons, and a 37mm cannon in the nose. Weapons designed to shred Boeing B-29s in a single pass. Soviet engineers had built the thing around a reverse-engineered Rolls-Royce Nenni engine, the same basic power plant the British had sold Stalin in 1947. The irony cut deep. The Panther's Pratt and Whitney J-42 descended from that identical Rolls-Royce design, cousins under the cowling, separated by about 40 knots and a generation of aerodynamic thinking. Amon led a flight from VF-111 off the USS Philippine Sea. His after-action report describes the intercept in language so flat it almost hides what happened. The MiGs came down from high altitude in a diving pass on a formation of Sky Raiders, the piston engine ADs grinding along on close air support runs near Sinuiju. Amon's Panther division turned into the attack. What he described next amounts to a straight-wing jet closing on a swept-wing fighter in a turning engagement and putting 20mm rounds into it until it burned. The intelligence summary forwarded to COMNA VFE used the phrase decisively engaged, which, in Navy parlance, meant the other pilot stopped flying. There's a lot more to this story than one kill on one afternoon. How the Panther ended up over the Yalu at all, what the Navy learned about jet combat in the weeks that followed, and why this airplane kept flying combat missions for 3 more years after everyone said it couldn't survive. If that's the kind of thing you want to see, hit subscribe and like so the next part finds you. And if you've got a detail I should know about, a squadron history, a relative who flew Panthers, put it in the comments. The MiG-15 pilot's name does not appear in any declassified American record. Chinese and Soviet archives conflict on whether the aircraft belonged to a Chinese People's Volunteer Unit or a Soviet regiment flying under Chinese markings. That file, if it exists, stays closed. Grumman's Bethpage factory floor in 1946 smelled like cut aluminum and desperation. The company had built its reputation on barrel-chested radial engine fighters, Wildcats, Hellcats, Bearcats, and every one of them ran on propellers. Jets changed the math overnight. Grumman's first attempt, the XF-9F, rolled out looking like a Bearcat that swallowed a stovepipe. Straight wings, a single centrifugal flow turbojet buried in the fuselage, tip tanks hanging off each wingtip like afterthoughts because the fuel consumption of early jets bordered on criminal. The prototype burned through its internal fuel in about 40 minutes at combat power. The engine problem defined everything. Grumman originally planned to use an Allison J-33, then switched to the Rolls-Royce Nene, built under license by Pratt & Whitney as the J-42. It produced roughly 5,000 pounds of thrust. The North American F-86 Sabre, already flying with swept wings out at Muroc, carried a General Electric J-47, making the same thrust but mated to an airframe built around speed. The Panther topped out around 575 miles per hour. Bureau of Aeronautics engineers ran the comparison and winced. One internal memo, paraphrased in a 1948 Naval Aviation News summary, described the performance gap as significant but manageable given the tactical role. That's bureaucratic language for it's slow, but we need it anyway. Why did the Navy buy it? Because carrier aviation demanded things swept-wing fighters couldn't yet deliver. Low-speed handling for deck approaches, structural beef for catapult shots and arrested landings. The F9F could take a 6G pull at 300 knots without folding, and it could fly off an Essex-class deck in rough seas without killing the pilot on the ramp. The Sabre couldn't do either. Grumman knew how to build for saltwater, Pitching decks, 18-year-old plane handlers. 616 Panthers came off the Bethpage line before production ended. The Navy put them on 11 carriers. By June 1950, VF-51 had declared operational readiness aboard the USS Valley Forge. 3 weeks later, North Korea crossed the 38th parallel. Every performance number favored the MiG-15. Every single one. Start with speed. The MiG topped out at 668 miles per hour at sea level. The Panther managed 575 in clean configuration, less with tip tanks. That's a 93-mile-per-hour deficit, enough that a MiG pilot who didn't want to fight could simply leave. Climb rate told the same story. The MiG-15 pulled 9,800 feet per minute going uphill. The Panther clawed for 5,000. A MiG driver who botched a pass could go vertical, reset above 50,000 feet, and come back down before the Panther reached 42,000. Its absolute ceiling on a cold day with a tailwind and optimism. Thrust-to-weight ratio split the difference even wider. The MiG's climb-off VK-1 engine put out 5,952 pounds of thrust, hauling an airframe that weighed 8,820 pounds empty. The Panther's J-42 pushed 5,000 pounds of thrust against a dry weight north of 9,000. Wing loading, pounds per square foot of wing area, ran close enough to call even, somewhere around 50 to 55 for both airframes. That meant turning performance stayed roughly comparable at medium altitudes, 1 metric out of 5 where the Panther didn't lose. The British had discovered something similar over the Western Desert in 1942, when Hurricane pilots kept engaging Messerschmitt 109Fs that outran them by 60 miles per hour. The answer then held now. If you can't chase, you turn. And if you can turn, you can shoot. But only if you survive the first pass. Grumman's structural margin made that survivable. The F9F carried 4 20mm cannons with a combined rate of fire around 2,400 rounds per minute. The airframe absorbed battle damage that would have buckled lighter designs, panels blown off, hydraulic lines severed, fuel cells punctured, control surfaces chewed apart, and kept flying. Maintenance crews on the Philippine Sea reported Panthers coming back with holes in the wing roots big enough to put a fist through. The jets refueled, rearmed, and launched again, so the MiG could outrun it, outclimb it, outceiling it, and outpower it in the vertical. The Panther could outturn it at medium altitude and outsurvive hits that should have killed it, while pouring 20mm fire at a rate no MiG cockpit wanted to sit in front of. Soviet and Chinese pilots flying those early MiG-15s trained for slashing attacks against bombers, fast passes from above, then extend away. Against a fighter that refused to die in the first pass, that playbook had a gap in it. 7 MiG-15s against 4 Panthers. Those odds should have produced a very short fight with a very predictable ending. Amon's division crossed the Yalu approaches at 15,000 feet, escorting AD Sky Raiders hauling ordnance toward the Sinwiju Bridge complex. The morning light off the river threw a white glare across the canopy glass. Then, the MiGs dropped out of high cover, silver airframes catching the sun in long streaks as they dove through 25,000 feet, noses pointed at the lumbering Sky Raiders below. The tactical intent read clearly: slash the bombers, extend north across the Yalu into Manchurian sanctuary, untouchable. Amen broke into the lead pair. The MiG flight leader committed the error that mattered. Instead of maintaining his dive, extending through, and climbing away, the tactics Soviet instructors drilled into every graduating class at Krasnodar, he pulled into a turning fight. At 15,000 feet, against an airplane built by Grumman, specifically to turn at 15,000 feet. Amen closed to firing range in a descending left turn. His gun camera footage, grainy, shaking, washed pale by the Korean winter sky, shows tracers converging on the MiG's fuselage just forward of the tail, pieces separated. The after-action report from VF-111's intelligence officer noted, strikes observed along the aft fuselage, producing heavy smoke and structural failure. The MiG rolled inverted and fell away burning. One of Amon's wingmen, Ensign E.R. DeLong, damaged a second MiG in the same engagement. The remaining 5 broke north. The whole fight lasted less than 90 seconds. What followed over the next 32 months ground the Panther into something nobody at Bethpage designed it to be. Not an air superiority fighter, a bomb truck. Panthers flew 78,290 sorties in Korea, the overwhelming majority hauling iron bombs, rockets, napalm against bridges, supply routes, troop concentrations. Marine Squadron VMF-311 alone logged over 1,000 close air support missions from carriers and shore bases. The airplane bled for that work. The Navy and Marines lost 270 Panthers in combat and operational losses combined. The intelligence summary forwarded to Pacific Fleet Headquarters after Eamon's kill contained a single recommendation about future MiG engagements. Force the engagement below 20,000 feet. The Panther couldn't go up to where the MiG lived, so the Navy planned to drag the MiG down to where the Panther could kill it. The last Panthers pulled from fleet service still wore their Korean paint, sea blue over light gray, squadron codes fading under fresh salt corrosion. Some had replacement skin panels riveted over combat patches that dated to 1951. The airframes carried the war in their bones, and nobody cared. Grumman's own replacement killed it. The F9F6 Cougar shared the Panther's designation, its cockpit layout, even its Grumman Iron Works durability, but it wore swept wings at 35 degrees and a Wright J65 engine, pushing 7,250 pounds of thrust, 646 miles per hour. The Cougar closed the speed gap with the MiG-15 almost entirely, and it did it while keeping the deck manners that made the Panther a carrier airplane. First fleet deliveries reached VF-32 in November 1952. The Panther had been the Navy's only carrier jet fighter in combat for barely 2 years before its successor started arriving in squadron hangars. By 1956, no frontline unit flew Panthers. Reserve squadrons held them a while longer, weekend warriors pulling 6G turns in an airplane their active duty counterparts already considered a relic. Training commands used a few as advanced jet trainers. The Blue Angels flew Panthers from 1949 through 1954, and that airshow duty probably kept the type in public memory longer than anything it did over the Yalu. 270 lost in Korea, 78,000 sorties. One confirmed MiG kill that rewrote carrier aviation doctrine for a decade. The Panther didn't retire. It just stopped being needed. The calendar did what the MiG-15 couldn't. What did the Panther prove that the spec sheets couldn't measure? Neil Armstrong flew Panthers with VF-51 off the Essex. John Glenn flew them with VMF-311 out of K3. Ted Williams, the Ted Williams, flew 63 combat missions in one, took AAA through his hydraulics over Kyomopo, belly-landed trailing fire, walked away from the wreckage, and flew again 6 days later. The airplane attracted men like that. Or maybe it just refused to kill them when lesser airframes would have. The Navy's internal assessment, compiled by the Bureau of Aeronautics in 1954, described the Panther's combat record as exceeding all operational expectations for a first-generation carrier jet. Their phrasing carried weight because Buair had fought Grumman on the original engine selection, pushed back on the straight-wing configuration, and questioned whether the J-42 could sustain carrier ops in a combat tempo. The airplane answered every objection at the cost of 270 airframes and the men inside some of them. But the Panther's real contribution sits underneath the combat statistics. Before Korea, carrier aviation's future belonged to propeller-driven attack planes. The brass believed jets burned too much fuel, needed too much deck run, demanded too much maintenance per flight hour. The Panther didn't disprove those concerns. It burned fuel at appalling rates. It did need the deck. Maintenance hours per sortie ran roughly double an AD Skyraider's. It just demonstrated that the trade-off bought something propellers couldn't deliver anymore. Survival in airspace where MiG-15s operated. Every swept-wing Navy fighter that followed, Cougar, Fury, Crusader, Phantom, launched from a doctrinal foundation, the Panther's 78,000 sorties built under fire. The airplane translated carrier aviation from one era into another and absorbed the full punishment of that transition. It was obsolete inside 5 years. Glenn's flight log from K3 lists his last Panther mission as February 19, 1953. Sortie number 63. Close air support, Sinanju area. Ordnance expended. 6 5-inch rockets, full 20 mm. The log entry after that column reads, aircraft recovered.